Hey YouTube, if anybody's on, can they let me know how the audio is? I had a bunch of issues with my computer this weekend, and hey Daryl, welcome to the stream, man. How is the audio? Hey Justin, welcome to the stream. Once again, I have no axe to grind. Thanks, Justin. I appreciate it. I did think about one of the issues that has been going through my head here recently, that keeps coming into play for me is water changes. And I thought it might be a good idea to spend some time. Hey, Laura. Oh, man. You're right. I have completely blown a day. It's Friday. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm here. I guess I'll go ahead and run a stream. Thank you, Laura, for cluing me in on having a senior moment and thinking that it was Saturday. And once you're no longer working regularly, it's kind of tough to keep up with what day it is. And Laura's exactly right. It's Friday, so I'm doing a Friday evening stream. I noticed that Corvus Oskin was running a stream as well right now. So basically, I'm cutting into his stream. I thought maybe he was cutting into mine. No, it's not a surprise stream, but what it is a elderly brain fart surprise stream, because it's Friday and Laura's exactly right. I've been so wrapped up watching the Senate hearings and following all this stuff as closely as I possibly could that I've been really distracted lately, so I apologize. And I guess I'll be doing another stream tomorrow in my normal time. So basically, I'm doing a surprise Friday stream, and the surprise is on me because I thought it was Saturday. Geez, maybe you guys shouldn't be listening to me for good advice about things. But anyway, the thing that I a twofer, yes. The thing that has been going through my mind lately is water changes, and I think it's critically important that we talk about water changes, that we talk about what's involved with water changes, we talk about what they represent, and that I mean, if you are a new aquarist, if you are someone who has just started in the hobby, whether you're young or you're old, um, it is important that you realize what getting an aquarium represents as far as how much time you will be required to spend keeping your fish thriving. Um, Unless you're someone who has the wherewithal and and money basically to set up a completely automatic water change system where it's both drained and filled for you and you don't have to do any of the work, then you need to be aware of what is required time-wise for you to do water changes. Now, if you just have one tank, let's say the salesman talks you into buying a 55-gallon tank and you get the full setup and you have one tank that you are taking care of and you learn how to do a water change. You learn how to vacuum the bottom of your tank. You learn how to work the siphon system. You learn how to uh, take testing equipment and test your water, because a lot of people ask, how do I know when I need to do a water change? And really, your nitrate levels and your nitrite levels are what should tell you when you need to do a water change. And it varies. People that run fully planted tanks, the plants need nitrates to fuel themselves, to use as building blocks to grow. And so those people would probably be okay running between 20 and 40 ppm nitrate on a nitrate test. But as soon as you hit 40 ppm nitrate, you are getting into an area that can potentially stress your fish. And if you go to 80 or 100, you are in a danger zone for your fish, and they need for you to do a water change to help them thrive. And you don't want to let something like that go on and on and on and on, getting worse. So you need to do a water change. And a lot of people then say, well, how much of a water change do I need to do? And the truth is, a 25% water change will just barely phase how much nitrate is in your aquarium. So if you've got a 55 gallon and you want to do a quarter of a change, half would be 27 gallons, so split that. We're talking 14 gallons. You would need to do a 14-gallon water change to do a 25% effect on your nitrate levels. You would need really to make it really make a difference. You're going to need to do a 50% water change on your tank to cut the nitrate levels in half, for it to be obvious to you when you retest the water after doing a water change and allowing it to circulate for a while. You need to do a 50% water change to effect a really solid change in your nitrates. And that, all bets are off if you are getting high nitrates out of your tap, which is one of the reasons that I think that most aquarists would need to have a TDS meter to easily test. Hey, honey. Oh, she's not there. To easily test what the levels are in your tap water, and if you notice a large difference, that you will immediately try to do a nitrate reading on that water to try to figure out whether you are getting high nitrates out of your tap water. So we're talking to a new aquarist, excuse me, that has gone out and bought 6 or 7 beautiful fish and been convinced to buy a 55-gallon tank. The sales rep manages to convince him how to add enough bacteria at the beginning to keep from killing the new fish he just bought. You know, makes him take the tank home first and set it up and get a bacteria bloom out of it, and then buy the fish and drop them in. You still need to as a new aquarist, you still need to come to terms with water changes, nitrate levels, TDS levels, hardness levels. You need to begin to understand what your basic water quality is coming out of the tap. And if the basic water quality coming out of your tap is not within the range that your fish can thrive in or survive in, then you need to think about getting an RO unit or using water that has been treated in some way, like distilled water or bottled RO water that hasn't had remineralization. You need to think about what it is that you're doing with the water out of your tap or with trying to modify that water out of your tap so that you can actually create a situation in your 55-gallon fish tank that will keep your fish alive. And this is all well and good. I think most people, except really raw new people to the hobby, kind of have a feeling for this. But then let's say you spot a fish that you cannot live without, and you know that you've done your research on the fish, you see it, you love it, you go home, you get your books out, you get your internet on, and you study that fish. And in the process, you figure out that that fish can't live in the same tank that you have the other fish in. Your 55-gallon either will not hold that fish, or that fish will eat all the fish in your 55-gallon. Whatever the reason is, you suddenly want another tank. And what you are doing when you begin to do that, and believe me, I'm all for multiple tank syndrome. I'm all in on it. I understand it. I live it. But what you have done is created another tank that needs to have water changes done on it. So now you're doing water changes on two tanks, and suddenly, even though the second tank may be much smaller, let's say you get a 20 high, which is going to hold about 25 gallons, and now you're doing water changes on a 55 and a 20 high. And this goes on fine for you. It's not too much of a problem. You begin to get into the rhythm of doing that water change. You get a feel for how your tank is going, and you suddenly are in a situation where you find yet another fish that you want that won't go in that tank or the other tank, and suddenly you're buying a third tank, and you need to have a 120-gallon tank for this fish because it's so big and boisterous that you need that much room for that fish to thrive in. And now all of a sudden we're doing water changes on 3 tanks that are equaling 200 gallons. And it becomes more of an effort to do those water changes. It's not smooth now. It doesn't flow easily. You don't automatically think, okay, I got to do water changes. And get up and do them without really fighting it. Suddenly now you look at those tanks and you think, what a chore. What a chore I have created for myself, that I have to get out water buckets and hoses and siphons and water treatment, and I've got to do all these carrying of heavy buckets. Suddenly I'm pulling almost 100 gallons of water out of my 3 tanks every time I need to do a water change, which most people will tell you should be in the range of weekly to every 2 weeks. If you don't do a water change every 2 weeks, if you just top off the tank by adding a couple of gallons of water in it every week, you will create a situation where old tank syndrome occurs. The fish adjust to the degrading water quality to such a point that when you suddenly say, oh, I need to do a 50% water change on everything, you suddenly put them through such a great amount of stress, changing all of that water all at once and changing the parameters in their tank. Now, old tank syndrome does not happen over a month. It doesn't happen over a couple of months. But over a couple of months, if you're just topping off water or if you're just doing 25% water changes, you can create old tank syndrome in 2 or 3 months. And that becomes another issue. So what I'm trying to get at here, what my angle is on this rant, if you would call it that, is that you need to fully understand what it is that you're agreeing to do by going out and buying these tanks and buying these fish and trying to keep them in such a situation where they can thrive. You know, you've got your 3 tanks, your 120, your 55, and your 20 high, and they're going along swimmingly, and suddenly you have 200 fry out of your 120-gallon tank. Let's say you put 2 Oscars in there, and they breed, and you've got 800 fry. All of a sudden, suddenly you're going to need some place to put those fry. They can't stay in their parents' tank because eventually their parents are going to eat them. And they can't go in the other tanks because they're so small that the other fish will eat them. So now you need to go out and buy another 55-gallon and set it up and add the fry to that 55 gallons so that they can grow out large enough where you can give them away, sell them, or at least keep them in a good enough condition where if either of the two things present themselves as an opportunity, you can have the fish healthy enough to where they could be sold or they could be given away to someone else, another hobbyist. So this hobby has a way of expanding whether you know it, whether you want it to, whether you like it. Now, I mean, you could just let those fry get eaten by the parents. You could just put them in another tank where they're going to get eaten by something else. You can basically cull all those fry. But when you start in this hobby, you need to understand completely what it is that you're agreeing to do, whether you know it or not, whether you sign a piece of paper. You need to recognize that this hobby creates a workload, that not only are you agreeing to have beautiful fish in beautiful tanks that are pleasing to watch and pleasing to observe, you are also agreeing to do the work required to keep these fish healthy. And that's one of the things that I think new hobbyists fail on. One of the ways that things get out of hand on them so that they reach a point where they're no longer enjoying the hobby. It's become more of a job, more of a heavy weight, an albatross around their necks. Yes, Laura's right. Laura says it's the same with any pet. And yet, as young people, we don't seem to agree with that. We don't seem to wrap our heads around that idea that it is not only is a pet a great joy and fish are the same, but it is also a lot of responsibility and a lot of work. Hey, Kevin, how's it going? I'm doing a surprise to me. I thought it was Saturday, Friday stream. I apologize to Corvus. I know that he's got a stream running, and I thought he was walking on me, and turns out I'm walking on him. Yeah, it's called old age, Kevin, and being retired to the point where I'm not in full control of my days anymore. I don't recognize the weekend anymore. I thought it was Saturday. I woke up and thought it was Saturday all morning. So, my point in this is that at some place in our hobby, we're going to come up against a wall. And the wall is, oh my God, I don't want to get up and do another water change today. And so we're putting ourselves in conflict with the good side of the hobby. I love to watch my beautiful fish. It's very zen to sit and watch their motions. I love to study my beautiful fish. I love to experience all their behaviors. I love to experience their breeding process, their fry care, their egg care. I love all that part of the hobby. But then all of a sudden, I am saddled with doing 200 gallons of water changes and carrying the water out in 5-gallon buckets. So you need to come up with some way in your mind to equate the two things. You need to be able to decide in the beginning how much work that you are willing to do, and also decide how much you're willing for that to expand. So if you're going to breed fish and you're starting out with guppies in a 10-gallon tank, you need to recognize that you will probably end up having 20 10-gallon tanks before very long, because guppies are very prolific. They breed like crazy. I mean, the only thing I know that's more prolific than guppies is probably convict cichlids or maybe shellies. Shellies will breed so fast. All you need to do is provide them with shells and decent water, and you are going and pears, and you are going to have lots of shellies. Anybody that's kept convict cichlids knows that they will breed like crazy. They are, hey, down the wormhole. How's Dee doing today? I'm doing my Saturday live stream on Friday by mistake. So it looks like I'm going to be doing a Saturday live stream tomorrow. It took me 3 weeks to think up this topic, so I'm going to be absolutely bereft of topics tomorrow. I apologize for jumping the gun, thinking it was Saturday, and brain farting a live stream on Friday evening instead of Saturday evening. Getting old sucks. Being retired and not being aware of the days of the week anymore also sucks. So, what can we do? what is it that we as hobbyists can do when we're faced with a situation where suddenly the glamour comes off of our eyes and we're looking at 10 or 12 tanks that we're having to do water changes on every week to keep the quality of their existence where it should be? What 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 can we tell ourselves? What can we what can we use to convince ourselves to rededicate, to re-energize ourselves into doing what we know we need to do? Yes, if you go on vacation, you can let water changes slide for 2, maybe 3 weeks and not do a single water change. And yes, your fish will survive. You know, some of them may die from some other malady, but yes, they can get by that long if you push it. But what methodology can aquarists use, hobbyists use, to convince themselves to get back in there and do those water changes when they've reached a wall, when they've reached a place where they no longer want to do it? I mean, you can sell off your fish and tanks and equipment and leave the hobby and never come back. That's one answer to this question. It's not the answer I'm looking for, but realistically, that's a potential possibility. It's potential that you will reach a point where you no longer want to spend that amount of time keeping up with all of the tanks and fish you have gathered. And so it's important to recognize that that is a possibility. Now, that's not what I'm all about. I'm not all about people dropping out of the hobby because they've thrown too much work on themselves. Their lives change. Something happens. They get busy. They have to move. Suddenly, it's just not worth the effort to keep their hobby going. What I'm trying to get at is how can we, as hobbyists that want to continue our hobby the way it has been going, motivate ourselves to do. Yeah, D, you're right. Sometimes downscaling is exactly what's required. But my advice for hobbyists that choose to downscale because something's going on or they've reached a point where it's become a grind for them and it's not really as enjoyable as it used to be, my advice for them: keep all of your equipment, keep all of your tanks, put them in a back room, put them in storage somewhere, because at some point that bug is going to bite you again. I myself reached a point about, I guess, 8 years ago now, where I had gotten to the point where I wasn't really giving it my all in the hobby. And my wife said, look, you're really not keeping up with these tanks. I had over 800 gallons of tanks, 2 110s, 150 gallon, and a slew of 55s and then smaller tanks. And I had them all over the house. And she said to me, Dwayne, you've reached a point where you're not taking care of these fish anymore. And all these tanks are taking up all the space in the house. I want my house back. So I got out of the hobby. I went dry. I gave away about 8 tanks to my local fish club. I donated them. I'm sure they sold them in an auction. And I only kept a couple of 55s and my 110-gallon tank. Yeah, Justin's got a really good point that if you have a heavily planted tank, that the plants themselves will help moderate how much water changes you have to do. That they will remove nitrates from the tank so that the water quality does not go bad so quickly. And that's a really good point, and it's something that people that are facing this issue, you know, how can I do less water changes? What methodology could I use to not have to do so many water changes every week? Heavily planted tanks would allow you to stretch that 2 weeks into 3 and maybe 4. I'd still say you ought to do them once every 3 weeks. But my situation, and I'll add this now, is that I went to Peru and collected all these fish, and because I knew tentatively what kind of fish I was going to bring back, I decided to add a 55-gallon and a 30-gallon tank to my already growing collection of tanks. And I've noticed that it is a great deal of effort now for me to do all the water changes. Some of them I can use my Python on and use my tap water to change the water. But quite a few of these tanks now that I have require RO, and so I have to set up my RO system. I do not have it permanently installed. It's just basically sitting on the kitchen sink counter, and I just plug it all in and run it when I need to create water. But now I have 85 gallons of water that's got to be RO that I have to do changes on every week. Justin says he keeps a lot of native fish and he loves his Indiana well water, and wells are a great way to handle water changes. Kevin says he has 7 tanks and he does 3 tanks on Tuesday and the other 4 on Fridays. So Kevin has broken up the load into 2 pieces, which are smaller, and that makes it easier for him, and that's a very good methodology to use. It's a very effective way of changing how the load of water changes hit you. No longer is it a 7-tank wall that you're smacking into. It's just 3 tanks, and 3 tanks are a lot easier to handle. And then doing 4 on Fridays when you have the time after work, that gives you a way to break down what's becoming a chore. I don't want our hobby to become a chore for those of us that are really trying to expand our hobby in the sense of keeping different kinds of fish, in the sense of, you know, you can be Lucas and do 24/7 tanks all the time, which basically Lucas does, and I applaud his effort. I've been there. I've seen the tanks. I know that he has automated it as much as possible, and I'm sure that that helps him not have to work quite as hard at doing water changes. But there's still a lot of requirements for 200 tanks. That is a full-time job to keep 200 tanks going. And I'm sure there are times when Lucas hits the wall where he just basically says, the heck with it. I want to go out and get a pizza and go to a movie. I'm not going to spend 24/7 on these tanks today. I need to spend some time with me, my child, my wife. I need to do quality time with them instead of constant 24/7 taking care of fish. Lucas is massively multiple tank syndrome affected. Lucas is excellent at keeping his fish. He is a perfectionist in many ways, in as many ways as you possibly can be. But not everyone is willing to commit themselves that deeply to this hobby. Now, Lucas sells fish, so for him it's a job. It's a way that he makes money. And so that changes it a little. It's no longer just a hobby for him. It is a way to make a living. But he is still dealing with the wall every day. Every day he faces this wall of how much effort is required of him to continuously take care of all those fish and tanks. And I find it laudable. I find that he is remarkable in his ability to continuously maintain this effort level that's required to go on. I couldn't do it. I just really couldn't do it. I would have to have 2 or 3 people helping me so that it didn't overwhelm me as far as how much time is required. My wife would probably divorce me. She would say, all you do all the time is fish tanks. I don't even get to talk to you anymore unless I track you down on a fish tank. So that's one far end of this scale. That's a way to look at the max amount that one human can do in keeping fish without added equipment that solves a lot of the problems. And Lucas has recognized this problem and begun to completely automate his system so that all that's required of him is to turn on his RO machine and open valves and drop a siphon in a tank and stick the end into the drain system, and it is automatically doing what he needs to do. Now that doesn't mean he doesn't need to vacuum a little, doesn't mean he doesn't need to, work at the tanks themselves, because one of the really great things about doing water changes that you begin to learn after you've been keeping fish for quite a while is that is how we as aquarists get a chance to really see what's going on in our tanks. Unless you automatically every day spend a certain amount of time studying each tank, you reach a point where you've got so many tanks and so many fish that you're focused on 1 or 2 of the tanks, and the other tanks you lose focus on, and you don't really spend as much time watching and observing them as you should. And I think that is solved by doing regular water changes so that you regularly are in that tank, looking at the fish, counting your stock, observing your stock closely so that you can see whether any of them are exhibiting problems, whether you've lost fish, whether fish are exhibiting disease, diseases, whether they're acting strangely. So that weekly water change gives you the time needed to really study what's going on with your fish. And that's one way of looking at how you can motivate yourself from a, oh, this is such a chore now, to, hey, I need to get in that tank. I need to see what's going on. And the best way for me to do that is to do a water change, because then I'm focused on that tank alone. And then when you move to the next tank, you will focus on that tank alone. And that's the method that I use. That's the way that I have managed to deal with the heavier water changes that are required of me now. And basically, I'm siphoning into 5-gallon buckets on all but my 2 largest tanks. The 75, I can do auto water changes, and the 110, I can do auto water changes on, in the sense of using a python. But the rest of the tanks require me to hand siphon out the water and hand add the water back in and carry the water out in 5-gallon buckets. All right, guys, I've run long on what should not have been a live stream. I thought as soon as Laura woke me up to the fact that I was broadcasting on Friday evening instead of Saturday evening, Kevin says he took his dad's old pond fountain and took off the fountain and replaced it with a super long hose. And he drains it right into the sump pump in his basement. Yeah, that's a good way to get rid of it too. Yes, Dee, I will run my regular normal live stream tomorrow. I apologize to anyone whose toes I've stepped on. Here I thought people were stepping on my toes, and I was too stupid to look at the date and recognize that it was Friday instead of Saturday. I apologize to anyone who I've walked over top of. All right, guys, I'm going to shut this down. I really should not have been doing this. You guys have a good Friday evening, and I will see you again tomorrow on Saturday.